Kyle Harkema, welcome along to the Level 10 Leaders podcast. So excited to have you on the show today.
Oh, great to be here, Ryan. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm excited for our conversation.
As am I, and I think the challenge I'm going to have is I'm a fan of the work you're doing. It's so aligned to what we talk about and preach at Level 10 Leaders. I'm going to have to try and check myself and make sure I do some like devil's advocate questions on the way through.
That's fine. That's fine. I love it.
Alrighty, Kyle, we like to hit you with some fast fact questions, have our audience get to know a little bit about the person that's sitting in the hot seat. Let's dive in. So, are you a breakfast or dinner person?
Breakfast.
Okay. Yeah. Are you also an early riser? Is that the routine?
I'm actually a night owl. I'm
Oh,
more of a
interesting.
night owl. Yeah. My work keeps me structured, right? But when I'm on vacation, I tend to stay up too late.
Okay. Okay. And what was on the breakfast menu this morning?
On the breakfast menu this morning was some French toast.
Oh, exotic.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
You obviously got some good structure in your morning that you've got time to indulge in French toast
For sure.
before you hit the workday. I'm
Yeah,
envious.
absolutely.
Okay. On holiday, would we find you doing something adventurous like bungee jumping, or are you more likely to be quietly resting on a pool lounger?
Yeah, I think on holiday I'm gonna be at the pool. I'm gonna be lounging at the pool.
Love that. And have you got a summer holiday planned, or have you had one recently?
Had one recently, just up in Michigan, enjoying lake life.
Love that. I'm very fortunate. Some friends of ours have invited us to their Michigan lake house in a few weeks' time. So pretty excited to get on the lake and do some water sports. Should be fun.
Absolutely. I love it.
Okay, learning wise, I mean, you're someone that's written their own book. We're going to talk about that in the show. When you're doing your own kind of learning, do you like
Mhm.
reading physical books? Do you like Kindle? Are you podcasts, YouTube?
Yeah,
What's your vibe?
for me, I guess I'm old school. I like a real physical book in my hand. I like to underline, I like to highlight, I like to make notes. So that's how I like to engage with material.
Nice. I find it now a bit of a challenge when I'm like on holiday and I'm on the pool lounger and I'm trying to read a book. And the physical one, I'm like, wow, this is hard work. I've got to hold the pages open.
I know, right? We get a little spoiled in our digital age.
We do, we do. And are you cats or dogs?
Both. Both.
Oh, okay.
I have two cats and a dog, so I love them
Okay.
all.
You've got the bases covered. Love it.
Yes.
And Kyle, if you were taking a bit of time out, watching some entertainment, getting a movie in, what would it be? Would it be thriller, comedy, drama, rom-com? What's your vibe?
I think I would be a thriller. I would be a thriller type. Yep.
Okay. Any recent watches that would come as recommendations?
The it's kind of a thriller slash horror. I just watched the movie Obsession, which is making waves in the headlines, and it lives up to the hype.
Okay. I haven't seen that one, so thanks for the tip. I'll put it on the list.
Yeah.
Alrighty, maybe before we dive into your kind of top three insights, which is the structure we love for the show, give us a bit of background. You've had a extensive business career. You've also worked in academia. You're an author. You've got a whole lot going on. Can you give us maybe a bit of a highlights reel of how Kyle got to this point?
Yeah, I mean, highlight reel. I refer to myself kind of in a scholar practitioner lane. So I am I'm a chief marketing and chief strategy officer. I also have the academic chops. I have an earned doctorate. And yeah, for me, I like to sit in the middle and bridge the gap between all of the knowledge that is advanced out of academia and figure out how to translate it into practice. Because from my perspective, there's a little bit of a gap there that not enough people are standing in the gap to make all of the knowledge that's being generated in academia uh, practical for business executives.
Yeah. I feel like there's even some alignment around a core theme that you have about how we go from strategy to execution. And I think it's somewhat similar, right? We can have a huge amount of theoretical work. Yes, it may be based in research and have some good data behind it, but it's still not quite real world.
Yeah.
So I totally appreciate that. And I recall in my own university journey, the professor that stands out most for me in my memory is the one that was doing exactly what you do, bridging actual, yeah, I shouldn't
Yes.
say actual work, bridging a commercial role and an academic role. And I just
Yes.
felt in his lectures, everything was so much more relevant because he was really talking about everything that happened actually
Yeah.
being done.
I agree 100%. And, I had similar experiences across my academic learning journey. And there's just so impactful when you have a professor and he or she can say, here's the theory that we're talking about today, and here's how I experienced it in this position at this company. And that is just extremely powerful and really helps the learning come to life, in my opinion.
Okay. And Kyle, your book, Strategic Clarity,
Yeah.
how long ago did you release that?
That released just over a month ago, so it is
Wow.
it is hot off the press.
It's
Yes.
fresh. Okay, love that. And just give us a bit of insight. How did you arrive at focusing in on that particular aspect of business?
Yeah, so it really was born out of my journey in parallel tracks, rising up in corporate environments as well as learning through my doctoral journey. And what I like to say is The the practice side gave me the pain, and the academic side gave me the knowledge and the language to be able to address that pain. And for me, I wanted to honor both sides that I'm trying to bridge, and that's what I really was striving to do with strategic clarity, is have all the robustness of the academic rigor, and but also have it written in a way where an executive can say, this makes sense, and I can see myself, my organization in these various quadrants. So
Okay. And was there something personally influential for you around focusing on this particular topic? I mean, business is so broad, you've got a
totally.
deep marketing expertise. You could have chosen a million different things to focus on. What was it in particular that made you center here?
Yeah, for this, I think it was just I saw a gap. I saw a gap as I continued to rise up and sat in more and more strategy sessions, creation, and then I just kept seeing them fail in execution. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth, but it just made me start to wonder what's happening beneath the hood, so to speak. The typical answers that I heard didn't seem to answer it enough for me, so I wanted to do some research into it.
Love that. Feels like again we're super aligned because the same thing we are observing so many organizations that have these fantastic strategy plans. They've done the big offsite. Everyone from the leadership team was nodding and high-fiving, going, "We've absolutely crushed the strategy." And
Yep.
then 6 months later, you're like, "Oh, how's it going getting that delivered?" And a little, yeah, maybe not quite so same level of enthusiasm.
Yeah, maybe
Um,
some crickets
yeah,
potentially.
I
Yeah.
think so. Okay. Carl, let's dig into your top three. Give us a summary and then we'll dive into them in a bit more detail.
Sure. Sounds great. So the first that I'd say is organizations don't execute strategy, they execute behavior. And what I mean by that is a strategy only succeeds when it changes the everyday decisions and actions of the people throughout the organization. The second one is leadership's job is to create clarity, not certainty. So leaders, we're sitting in the leadership chair. We can't predict the future, but what we can do is provide a clear direction and decision framework that helps our people navigate uncertainty together. And then the third is great companies don't eliminate disagreement, they create a common decision framework. So, high performing organizations, in my experience, they encourage healthy debate and while also ensuring that decisions are made using the shared strategic principles rather than competing agendas from different functional silos.
Okay. I'm excited to unpack these in some
Yeah,
more detail. Let's go deeper on the execute strategy, the execute
sure.
behavior. I
Mhm.
really, and maybe if you can share some examples of what you've seen,
For
both good
sure.
and bad in the zone. Yeah, go
Yeah.
deep on that for us.
So I think starting off, this is probably the biggest lesson so far that I've learned in my career and ultimately became the foundation of strategic clarity. So early in my career, I thought execution was a lot about accountability. If projects weren't getting done, I assumed people weren't aligned, maybe weren't disciplined enough, or simply not executing. Then I started sitting in the executive meetings and the strategic planning sessions. And to your point, Ryan, I'd watch really smart leadership teams spend days or maybe even a week building really thoughtful strategies. They leave the room, and to your point, everybody's high-fiving. We're agreed, we're on the same page. And then 6 to 9 months later, the organization's still struggling. And that bothered me a lot. I kept asking myself, how can this happen? How can these really smart people create a strategy and then struggle in execution? And from my perspective, I think we were asking the wrong question. A lot of leaders ask whether people understand the strategy. And sure, that's important. They need to understand conceptually. But what they weren't asking is if they understood how their behavior should change because of said strategy. And those are completely different questions. So imagine, announcing a new strategy, rolling it out after a strategic offsite, and it's Friday afternoon and you have a town hall, and then Monday morning arrives and engineering begins prioritizing projects. Sales starts qualifying opportunities. Normal business starts happening. What should change? If nothing changes, the strategy never became operational. And that's why I say that organizations don't execute strategy, they execute behavior. So I think that the strategy only becomes real when it starts affecting the hundreds or thousands, depending on the scale of your organization, of everyday decisions throughout the company. And for me, once I started viewing organizations through that lens, almost every execution problem looked very different. So instead of maybe saying, how do we communicate better? I started asking, what behaviors are we actually reinforcing every day? And to me, that changed everything.
I, I love this. How do you, I'm sure like myself, I'm nodding along, agreeing.
Mhm.
Uh, how do we as leaders,
Mhm.
with this understanding of executing behaviors, what do we need to do differently to help our team succeed and obviously implement that strategy?
Yeah, and I think for me, it's can you create that shared decision framework? And I say it, and it sounds easy, but it takes a lot of thought. And I've done this with organizations. It's hard work, but it's good work. So, for example, let's say that you want to be really innovative as an organization. That's how you believe that you can win in your particular market space and time. Great, right? Everybody can align around that. It sounds good. It looks good on a billboard or whatever or on a poster. But to me, the deeper question is, okay, if we're going to win through innovation, what does that look like? How do we start making decisions in engineering? How do we start making decisions in operations? How do we make decisions in marketing and sales, customer service, every department? Aligning to we're going to win through innovation. And that's what I mean by strategic clarity and strategic alignment is what often happens is, yay, we're going to win, we're going to be more innovative, and then everybody goes back to business as usual. And there's not a shared decision framework to align everybody's unique contribution to that goal under one overarching strategic posture, as I call them.
Okay, let's jump to the decision framework. You've mentioned it a couple of times. It's clearly a important tool that you
Yeah.
see being utilized. Can you maybe explain how it works, and then give
Yeah.
us some examples? Like I'd love to continue one of those examples of like the innovation company or the company that thinks they're going to win on innovation, and then how does this
Sure.
decision framework affect the behaviors day to day?
Yeah, so let's use a similar example. If a company says that their desire to win is going to be driven by delighting their customers, for example, being extremely customer centric, that's great. and potentially viable, right? So there's nuance. We have to make sure that how you believe you're going to win actually fits your market space and your dynamics. But that's viable. However, have the leaders sat down and determined what does being customer centric mean for each department? And I want to be real clear because I'm not advocating that you tell engineers how to engineer. That's not it, right? We're not micromanaging. However, asking the question to the engineering or the product department, those internal or operations, for example, those departments that are not inherently customer facing, how can you take what we know about the customer and how does that change what products you're engineering, what the product roadmap looks like, how you're value engineering the products that you're making. There's a variety of different things, but we're thinking about it from the lens of how it benefits the customer and how we know our customer uses our product, as opposed to we're going to build it because we can, or because we believe it's cool, or because we think that it's going to fit a need in the market, but there's no external customer validation.
Okay. So let me run with this example and kind of give
Yes.
a couple of scenarios. So um, often what I see in organizations when they talk about delighting the customer,
Mhm.
often what it refers to is rescuing the customer. We've underperformed. We haven't delivered on what we promised or said we would do,
Mhm.
and now we need everyone in the organization running around doing heroics to try and get that customer back on board.
Right.
Clearly, a very poor approach to building profitable, repeatable customers. Very hard to
Yeah.
scale. So in that context, if the strategic initiative from this company is delighting the customer,
Mhm.
and engineering is going, well, how could I use my decision framework to either rescue this one customer that we've been told about today, or I
Mhm.
could spend the time maybe improving a process, doing preventative maintenance, doing something that maybe helps prevent the next customer from having a poor experience. How would they use the decision framework to decide which of those two things is the best to do today?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Ryan. And my immediate response to that would be peel back the layers. Let's define this customer, right? So, first of all, not all customers are created equal. Every organization, if they're being intentional about their customers, they would have, an ideal customer profile or an ICP. So, they may have some legacy customers that they appreciate, but ultimately that's not who they're going to grow with. So how reactionary you need to be to that particular customer depends on where they land in, oh, if this is an ideal customer, this is who we want to gain more of. We need to be extremely responsive to them. And you kind of framed it as a binary, like we do either or. I would argue that both are needed. And ideally, it's not just about the heroics. Sometimes you have to do the heroics, and a lot of times I've seen heroics can happen from the customer service team or customer success team and or the product team. However, if it's an ideal customer profile that you're doing the heroics for, I would advocate if I was consulting that company, do a post-mortem. What can now you change to your processes to ensure that that kind of heroic is not needed in the future? And you can modify your processes to ensure that you get it right the first time. That's what I would advocate for.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe these different definitions of customer in an organization, like maybe engineering's customer is actually internal rather
Right.
than external, right? But
Mhm.
the broad understanding across the organization of who are we ultimately trying to serve externally,
Mhm.
who pays our bills, but then
Yeah.
internally, which of our customers do we have to serve?
Yeah.
And I guess that takes strategic alignment for all departments to be aligned with who they're trying to serve, not being
Yeah.
self-centered around
Yeah.
my individual results or for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen it time and again in my career. Some of those more inward focusing departments, um, they can be isolated. And a lot of the organizations will say, yeah, we really want to be customer centric. And my simple question is, how would engineering or how would product or how would operations tell me that their decisions are being changed because of what we know about the customer? And often I get blank stares.
I'm sure.
Or
Sure.
what do you mean the customer, they don't have anything to do with the customer? And I would say I strongly disagree.
Hmm. Absolutely. Okay. In the decision framework you talk about, Kyle, is there like in strategic clarity, is there actually a framework that you suggest and how people can utilize it?
Yeah, so there's a lot. So in strategic clarity, there's quadrants, right? So they could be, and it's based off of how innovative they are, right? If we're going to keep it simple, there's an innovation axis, and then
Hmm.
there's a customer axis. And there are
Hmm.
four different quadrants that are born out of where you believe that you are and where you want to be per what your industry context requires of you and how you're going to win. So ultimately, yes, there's a whole deep well of how you would make those decisions. But ultimately, what I'm trying to create or what I tried to create is a mirror so that an organization could see this is what we are today, but also a map in terms of, okay, here's where we are. Maybe we're in the hybrid zone, which is in the middle where you really don't have a distinct posture, but we want to be leading with innovation or we want to be leading with customer centricity. And that becomes their North Star. And once they have that North Star, they can modify as needed, modify systems, modify behaviors as needed with intentionality, as opposed to kind of groping through the fog that I've seen a lot of organizations do over time.
Okay. Are you able to share an example of a organization you've worked with, or maybe your own, and how you've seen a strategic imperative with the
Yeah,
right decision framework
for sure.
affect behavior? And I think what I'm really interested in is to try and understand how have you seen behavior affected at a senior leadership level,
Mhm.
maybe at a excuse me, a management level, and then
Yep.
maybe at an individual contributor level.
Yeah, so let me just kind of talk you through working at KMC Controls, which is a building automation manufacturer. That's where I serve as an executive. So I applied this at my own organization over the past year. We went through a company-wide strategic planning process. Then we established our goals, translated those into departmental goals, and ultimately into individual goals. And what I found fascinating is that how the conversations changed. So instead of departments optimizing for their own priorities, leaders began asking, how does this contribute to our larger strategy? Meaning, how does this drive us toward being more customer centric? That is where KMC decided that it could win, is strong customer centricity. And that may sound simple, but it's really a significant shift. Um, and how that operationalizes is when we set departmental goals, now all of the departments need to think about here's what it looks like to become what I call an insightful optimizer in the book, which is very high in market orientation, knowing your customer, knowing your competitor, and having really good interfunctional coordination. Now, all of our departmental goals and our corporate goals need to align under that's the direction that we're going as a company. So then it becomes a lot easier once you know that North Star to then take it down to the individual contributor level. So, for example, I'll give you the marketing example. We'll do a voice of customer visit, and how we operationalize that is we take the key insights from every voice of customer session that we do, and it's baked into the organizational process that every departmental lead talks about what we learned at that session and then asks the department, now that we heard from this voice of customer and it's an ideal customer, what do we need to be doing differently in our departmental daily activities because of what we heard? So it becomes much more of a virtuous cycle, a good feedback loop. And then the last piece is acting, it can't just be head knowledge, right? So now those insights need to birth actual initiatives or projects or changes to the product or to the processes. And then we close the feedback loop by telling the customers, hey, we heard you, and here's what we changed differently, how we are behaving differently at KMC because of what you told us.
Okay. I love that. And how does KMC maintain visibility of what's
Mhm.
being committed to? So totally understand that flow. You've had voice of customer, department head has gone, I need to change A, B, and C. I'm going to go away and do that. How do you maintain that rhythm and the word behavior, the
Yeah.
behavior of execution around ideas that are being generated?
Yeah, so part of that is what I would encourage anybody who's listening, if they have a project management system, whatever tool they use. So for us, that becomes we have a strategic planning board, and then those initiatives get logged, and we see, okay, when's our due date? When are we hoping to accomplish it by? Have we told the customer that we're working on this? And then each department, depending on who needs to contribute, then knows, okay, we need to bring our individual contributors together to accomplish this particular project. So,
Okay, great. And
so let
let
me
me
let me give you a real life example
sure.
that's
Sounds good.
hot off the press. So one of the examples is we heard in the building automation space, a lot of our products are maybe in cabinets or you have your technicians and they come up to them and they're like, okay, great, there's a controller or a valve, and part of it is they need to get in there and maybe the system is misbehaving. So they need to get in there under the hood. And the customer said, you know what would be great for our technicians is if you created a product that had a QR code on it and then they could walk up to it, scan the QR code, and that would automatically open the documentation that they need to know how to get under the hood for that particular product, right? So that became an initiative that is actually ongoing right now.
Right.
And it's obviously an interdepartmental
Yeah.
activity with operations and marketing and product. So that's a real tangible, hot off the press example.
Okay, that's a really, really good one. And
Mhm.
sounds like the usual simple is often best. Simple of just being able to scan a QR code, but taking them to the right place in the
Mhm.
documentation rather than them spending hours searching, going through. Very, very good. And do you measure your rate of execution on these initiatives you have in play?
Yes, absolutely. For me, every project, every goal, we try to be very disciplined. There needs to be key performance indicators, leading, lagging key performance indicators. So yeah, we certainly measure, and the biggest thing is can we get it done in a timely fashion, and then also making sure that we close the loop to let the customer know that we heard them and that this was not us. We didn't come up with this idea. You helped us co-create this idea, which is really one of the value propositions at KMC is how responsive we are to our customer base.
Totally. And builds customer connection and loyalty, right? Because they're like, oh, they're listening to me and now they're doing something about it. And now they've actually completed it. It's like,
Not
yeah,
only
a
that,
virtuous
but
cycle.
you probably know just as well as I do, the only thing worse than not asking is asking and not doing anything about it. So yeah, we're very intentional about that not being the case.
Okay. Let's talk about leadership's job as clarity,
Yes.
not certainty. I
Yes.
thought I thought because all you executives got the big dollars, you also had a crystal ball that allowed you to see everything with perfect clarity. Is
If
that not how it
only it
works?
was that easy, Ryan. If only it was that easy. So, yes, I think that that's a huge misconception, not just from you, but from a lot of people, is that once you get promoted to a certain level of leadership, that you have all the answers. And there's a difference between being accountable for the decisions made and having that crystal ball that you have talked about. The older and more experienced I become, that's not true. The markets change, the technologies change, competitors, customer expectations. There's too many variables for any of us to create certainty. But what we can create is clarity, right? Clarity around what we're trying to accomplish, clarity around how we're going to make decisions, what are going to be those posture elements that drive how we make decisions. And then lastly, what are the behaviors that we need to execute to support the organization and what we're trying to become? So, I worked with a lot of executive teams, and one of the things that I hear is people just need more communication. Perhaps that may be true, but after spending time with that organization, it became clear that communication wasn't the core issue. It was more of a symptom, not a root cause. Because in that instance, people could explain the strategy, so it had been communicated adequately. What happened is they interpreted it differently. So because it didn't drift down to the behavioral level, sales thought it meant one thing, engineering thought it meant another, and operations a third. So nobody was confused. They simply lacked that shared behavioral interpretation of what the strategy means. So that taught me something, that leadership isn't about giving everybody more information. It's about creating the clarity for people to make similar decisions, even when you're not in the room, because that's
Yes,
scalable leadership.
correct.
Yeah. If your organization depends on you making every important decision, you haven't built leadership. What I think is you've built dependency. And
Yeah,
that's a
and
problem.
constraint.
Yeah, that's a constraint. That's a scalability problem.
Yeah, indeed. Uh, in your book, Kyle, you talk
Mhm.
about the SOI,
Mhm.
the Strategic Orientation Index. Have I got that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit about that and how an organization would go about using it?
Absolutely. So ultimately, how they would go about using it, I do have a free light version on my website, which anybody can take, and it kind of gives them a flavor for what it is. But at its core, it's a diagnostic, right? So you remember earlier I said strategic clarity and the strategic orientation index is meant to give you a mirror and a map. So the map is a lot of the context in the book. The mirror is that diagnostic piece, right? So that is a 60 question diagnostic that's informed by all of that research. You know, I talked about trying to bridge the research and the practice. So it's all research backed. And that's what creates that mirror across a variety of different constructs that I can go and say, all right, today, your organization is in the hybrid zone or is acting as an insightful optimizer. Is that where you want to be? And it changes the intentionality of the conversations and the questions. Oh, that's how we're being perceived today. That's not how we want to be. And what I found is a lot of executives have a vision in their mind for what they believe the organization is. And what the SOI does is then holds up the mirror to say, is it actually? Or are you maybe misconstrued in how you believe your organization is behaving?
Okay. I love the idea of the mirror. We use it in our own framework, and that's fascinating what people see when they have the opportunity to look in the mirror.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes people don't like to see what's in the mirror, but what I often say is it's not meant to be a judgment. It's meant to say and finally see with clarity where you are today. Because if you don't know with clarity where you are today, you can't chart a course to where you need to be tomorrow.
Yeah. And if you're not prepared to spend some time absorbing that reflection,
Yes.
then again, that's probably a hole in your leadership capability because that's ego driven, not crowning the company king and figuring out how do we do this
I
better.
totally agree with that assertion, Ryan. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Kyle, you've unlocked so many things, one that certainly we're aligned with, but I'm sure some of our listeners are like, this is great. Tell me more. You mentioned some free resources you have on your website. What is your website?
Yeah, so my website is kylejharkema.com. And what I would encourage for any listeners that are interested in their nodding their heads and saying yes, I'm also active on LinkedIn. I regularly share research, practical insights around strategy execution and organizational leadership. I publish a weekly newsletter. And if you're interested in going deeper, my book, obviously, as you mentioned, is Strategic Clarity, and it explores why a lot of organizations struggle to execute strategy. And of course, introduces that strategic orientation index. You'll learn a lot more about those undergirding academic constructs that have been proven over 4 decades worth of research to drive meaningful growth, profitability, and innovation. So, and it's really trying to understand how an organization thinks, listens, and acts. That's the mnemonic for strategic clarity.
I like that. Thinks, listens, and acts. And
Mhm.
I also liked one of the key statements, which is strategy isn't what gets written down, it's what gets repeated.
Yes, 100%.
And I
Yep.
think that dials into the daily behavior piece, right? So
Yes.
yeah, it's
Yes.
a nice way to succinctly capture the a big part of our conversation.
Yeah.
Um, Great, Kyle. Any closing words? Anything else you'd like to share with our audience
Yeah,
before we?
I honestly, Ryan, it's been great. The time has flown by, and what I would leave with listeners is great organizations aren't built because we as leaders have all the answers. They're built because we create enough clarity and good decisions happen with us not in the room. And that's ultimately what an excellent strategy should do is it should change behavior because we don't execute strategy, organizations execute behavior. So it's been a pleasure, Ryan. Thank you so much for having me again.
Thanks, Kyle. I feel like that was the perfect summary. Thank you so much for closing us out in such a fine way. Appreciate your time joining us on the podcast today, and we will make sure we put your LinkedIn and your website links in the show notes so people can access those nice and easily. Thanks, Kyle. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Ryan. Take care.